name is Rabi Tamarhulet, Vice Chair and Acting Chair, called the Residential and Manufactured Structural Board meeting of April 6, 2022 to order at 9:31. Melissa, please call the roll, please.
Vice Chair, Acting Chair, Rabi Tamarhulet.
Yes.
Gordon Anslow.
I'm here.
Thank you. James Austin, excused. Forrest Barnes.
Here.
John Camiller.
Here.
Rich Fry.
Here.
Emily Kemper.
Here.
Douglas Lathine, excused. Rich Tovar, excused. Eli Volem.
Here.
Mr. Chair, we have a quorum.
Thank you. Any comment or amendment to the agenda and the order of business? None. So the agenda and the order of business approved. Okay, we have the last meeting minutes, and do you have any comments or amendment to the draft? Okay, here none. Then the minutes are ruled final. Our next meeting regularly is scheduled on July 13th, 2022. We have a couple of information about the board update. Mr. Forrest Barnes has been reappointed to a second term through June 30th, 2025. Thank you for your continued service. Second one, and today we say farewell and a big thanks to Mr. Eli Volem for his service on the Residential Manufactured Structural Board. Eli began on the board on July 1st, 2018. Eli also represented the board on the Construction, Industry, and Energy Board. His term expired June 30th. Eli is a customer relationship manager for key accounts at Eugene Water and Electrical Board, primarily working with the large industrial and manufacturing businesses. For 10 years prior to his current position, Eli helped develop, implement, and manage utility energy efficiency and green building programs for Eugene Water and Electrical Board. And before that, as a builder outreach specialist for Energy Trust and a green building consultant for Earth Advantage. He earns an MBA from University of Oregon and has served on the Bring Recycling and Home Builders Association board. He brought his experience to the board, helping advance code in a way that cost effectively meets state goal and delivers real benefit to industry and consumer. Eli has appreciated board discussion and public input. He said, "I am pleased that despite occasionally having diverging opinions, we've been able to keep things moving in forward progress toward achieving the governor's executive orders." Thank you, Eli, for your service, and we wish you success in the future.
Thank you, Ravi.
Next item is the public comments. I invite Mr. Bolton, Senior Policy Advisor, to address any public comment requests.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Bolton, Senior Policy Advisor with the division. As of this morning, we had not received any requests for general public comment to the board. but we'd like to hold the line open here just for a few moments, in case there is someone in the meeting that did not sign up that would like to provide general public comment to the board. If there is someone on the line now that would like to provide general public comment, please identify yourself now. All right, hearing none. That does conclude general public comment.
Thank you. Next item is the BCD reports. And we start with Mr. Rocco, and next is Mr. Heizer.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. For the record, Tony Rocco with the division. Just a quick program update here before turning it over to our administrator, actually, before Mr. Heizer. So I wanted to take a few minutes to make the board aware of two recent technical bulletins that our division has posted regarding care facilities within detached dwellings. Both of these bulletins outline compliance paths available for not requiring sprinkler protection of the dwelling care facilities. So the first one is regarding certified and registered family child care homes, and it is tied to the 2019 OSSC interim amendments, which became effective this past January. This bulletin outlines the additional provisions approved by the Building Code Structures Board and describes optional compliance paths in lieu of providing sprinkler protection. The second is regarding adult foster homes and residential training homes, such as group homes. And this bulletin summarizes Senate Bill 1548's impact on the code requirement for sprinklers. With a similar net result, the bill prohibits sprinkler protection from being required for these licensed facilities prior to July 1, 2024. For all of these care facilities, the licensing authorities are also working on refining their safety requirements required to obtain licensure. And both of these bulletins are available on our program pages. I think Melissa has also placed them in the chat for quick access there. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd like to turn it over to our administrator, Alana Cox, unless there's any questions from the board. Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Tony. Good morning, Chair Tamara Houlet, members of the board. I'm Alana Cox, Administrator of the Building Codes Division. You have a robust agenda today, including a more detailed presentation from Mark Heizer. But I wanted to briefly give you a high-level overview of kind of where things stand going into code adoption for next year. So as you recall, we adopted the last residential code in April of 2021 after a 6-month delay due to the challenges of COVID. The electrical and plumbing codes had the same 6-month delay. And when we did that, we said our intention was to get back on cycle for the next code adoption, which is slated for October 2023. So since 2017 and the adoption of Executive Order 1720, October 2023 has been looming large as the date we were to adopt a zero energy ready home code. This is why we're kicking off code adoption so early. And it may feel to you, as it does to us, like we just finished adopting and training on the current code. But we want to make sure we give ourselves the time to get this right. You'll also see later in your board packet some draft rules about code proposals. We're hoping these rules will help us have a clearer code adoption cycle so that we have more reliable efficiency modeling and cost information as the code committee considers code proposals. The executive order does not waive any board processes and maintains the board's authority over code adoption, but staff have been working for some time on the code package for this cycle, and I'm confident we can find a technically and economically feasible path to a zero energy ready home. I also want to quickly update you on last legislative session. Tony let you know about the changes related to group homes and adult foster homes with Senate Bill 1548. The other bills of interest to this board, both in 2021 and 2022, were bills that would have allowed local government to make the REACH code mandatory. Those bills did not pass, and in the last session, they instead created a task force on resilient, efficient buildings. It's a legislative task force with 27 members, asked to identify and evaluate policies related to building codes and building decarbonization for new and existing buildings while maximizing additional benefits such as increasing energy efficiency, improving resilience against climate change, improving public health and air quality, reducing the percentage of household income that goes towards energy costs, and mitigating displacement and other impacts that result from wildfire, heat waves, and other climate change events. So big job for the task force. They had their inaugural meeting yesterday. I saw another number of faces familiar to this board, including Jay Hansen, Mechanical and Construction Industry Energy Board Chair. I gave a presentation yesterday going over how we adopt codes, how they can impact climate change and climate resilience, and how we stack up against other states in this space, which is very well for the record. Oregon continues to be a national leader on energy efficient buildings. The one last general thing I want to note is that state government is officially opening to the public on May 1. We'll be sending out more details to all of our board members about what this means. But basically our plan is to have hybrid meetings after May 1, where you all can choose and members of the public can choose whether to attend in person in the boardroom or virtually. I hope this ongoing virtual access will allow us to continue to hear from folks across the state and make it more convenient for those of you who have to travel to Salem. And with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Heizer for some more detailed presentations, unless there are any questions for me.
All right, I'll go ahead, Chair Tamlin. For the record, thank you. Mark Heizer with Building Codes Division, mechanical and energy engineer for BCD on the Policy and Technical Services team. Wanted to begin today. First one program update is the issuance of statewide interpretation 2202. We were getting a lot of questions on some inconsistency on application of the ducts inside requirement for installation of new HVAC systems and how that might apply to additions or actually to alterations of existing systems. This is to clarify people running a new run out to a diffuser were being asked to insulate entire attics. It clarifies that really the intent of the ducts inside installation provision for new HVAC systems was applying to new construction and within additions that are new construction as well. With that, I'd like to share my screen today and begin with a reminder of sort of where we are on energy provisions today. And I know some of you have probably seen some of this information before, but we have new board members and it has been a while since we've done a review of the energy code provisions here in Oregon. With that, would like to start with really an overview of where we've been with energy code, especially residential in Oregon, sort of a progress report on where we are today. As the administrator noted earlier, Administrator Cox had noted earlier, we do have some executive orders, and of course we're wrapping up after a legislative session and sort of going over where progression is moving forward for the 2023 residential code. One thing that really want to point out is that Oregon did start with the very first real statewide energy code, the first real mini-maxi in 1974, and that included a Chapter 53, which included energy provisions for residential occupancies. In the early days, under the old CABO books, we were looking at, it was a own Chapter 53. It's been Oregon specific. We came up with it originally, even when we moved on to a separate residential code and the use of the International Residential Code. We've continued to maintain sort of an Oregon specific code because we've really been, for the most part, ahead of everyone. So this is a slide that's sort of been shown before, but sort of updated for current standings are where code progression has been. The 100 line is really a normalized energy use of homes relative to 1975 era, some of the first model energy codes that came out. Oregon is the orange line below the blue line. You can track progression through the years of where we started in 74, general progression. As time went on, we've made some big jumps through the years, but been on a general progressive slope heading toward really what is the goal or target for Executive Order 2004. Where we are today, of course, is with 2021 Oregon Residential Specialty Code, and you'll see dashed lines that really model code has made some very big jumps in the past few years and have caught up with us, but we've continued to have local development of trying to maintain leadership in the space. Other states, of course, adopting much later. Many began in the 2000s, or even some have just begun in the past 4 or 5 years of having statewide energy codes. So for 2023, of course, Executive Order 1720 sets this as a target for us to reach for the next code. What that is the equivalent performance of the U.S. Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Home. And we'll go into that a little bit more on our next slide. One thing that we'd like to point out is looking at the vintage of homes and what code adoption in Oregon has meant for people in the state. The pie chart here, and we're going to see a few of them today, it comes from Department of Energy report for their 2018 code. You'll notice the vintage homes post 2010 on the screen really are only representing 5%. Currently, post the big downturn from the housing crisis, we are now adding about 1% to the total residential homes stock every year. But one thing we'd like to point out is that, when we began in 1974, almost half the homes in Oregon have been built to an energy code. Of course, that means half weren't built to an energy code, but beginning in the early 90s, when, the code really picked up and made significant advances in the envelope and other areas of the home, really 1/4 of our building stock has been built to a very good code, whereas some states, again, haven't begun until the 2000s or even post 2010, which represents a very small sliver of home construction. One other thing I want to point out on this is that when there's a remodel, such as an alteration or an addition, the current building code applied. So we actually have 50 years of using a better code, almost 50 years of using a better code to apply to alterations to this 50% of homes that were built prior to energy code. And that also applies even to some built to after 1974, because if they were altered afterwards, you'll see that, they had to do their alterations to the new code to meet it. So what they worked on, they had to make better. One thing I want to point out is that, you always hear this 40% of buildings, 40% of energy use is from buildings. Well, because Oregon did such a good job early, our percentage of building energy use is going to be much better than other states because we did begin early. We're benefiting from having that greater percentage of our building stock built to a better code. You have to consider the cumulative effect of the good work that the residential board has done. It's like a college, it's like a college or retirement fund. We have invested early, we've invested often, and the retirement fund or the energy code that we invested in was better than the model code. So our return on investment, has been really significant and is being felt by Oregonians throughout the state. So want to just really point out the great work that this has resulted in, some great work for the state. Another slide here from the Department of Energy, sort of showing that, I need to make sure. Yes, I hit one too many enters here, looking at the executive orders and for future code. Again, Executive Order 1720 set for by 2023 for the residential codes energy provisions to be equivalent to the U.S. Department of Energy's Zero Energy Ready Home program. Also, Executive Order 20-04 said that by 2030, the residential code needed to have cut 60% of the regulated load relative to the 2005 Oregon Residential Specialty Code. And just a reminder, once again, that our 2005 code was already an advanced code. And of course, regulated loads are those that the division in the code have authority for. You know, what is permitted in the building, what you put in the building. The unregulated loads are really relative to the occupants living in the home. So on this slide, again, another pie chart from the Oregon Department of Energy. It shows the regulated sectors and unregulated sectors and how that energy use for really the entire residential spectrum, including multifamily, is working out. So on average, for us, lighting represents about 6% of energy use of residential. That's come a long way. New technology has really helped reduce the amount of load used from lighting, but of course, people are still going to need to turn their lights on. Water heating, of course, has some room for improvement, but via both the plumbing code, the energy code, and appliance standards done by the Oregon Department of Energy, the water heating portion is reducing, but has some room for improvement, but not much more that can, there's a little bit more that can be done there. Heating efficiency, of course, we're seeing great technology. Cooling isn't much of this energy use in Oregon, that 34% portion of the pie, but there are some improvements in the cooling technology. One thing that's happening as part of the heating and cooling is, of course, air leakage into the home was always seen in the heating and cooling load, but as we've sealed our homes better, we're now having to add a little bit of energy use to homes to make sure that fresh air ventilation does occur. So that's sort of a plus and minus for us. Then the remainder, of course, there are unregulated loads like refrigerators, the cooking, laundry, clothes dryers, and then, of course, TVs, other home appliances, hair dryers, other plugged-in appliances. One thing about those is that these, I guess, wind up under Department of Energy has done some work, and there are some new technologies that may help reduce that, but this unregulated portion has stayed fairly consistent as far as the total use over the years. So when we get to Executive Order 2004, it's best to start and wanted to point out where we were in 2005. The portion that we're supposed to be dealing with in the energy code, of course, is what gets permitted, and that is this blue portion of the pie. And we need to be able to cut the target for the 2029/2030 code is to cut 60% of this load. And what I'd like to point out is that here is where the 2021 code is sitting. Since 2005, we've cut out this much of the regulated load, the gray section of the pie. And when that slice of the pie goes away and you resize the total energy use of homes under the 2021 ORSC, you're going to get a smaller pie. And sort of once you resize the packaging, I guess, and it's like, when you're at the grocery store, that half gallon of Tillamook ice cream isn't a half gallon anymore. So as the pie gets smaller, of course, when you resize this, the percentage of the load that's, quote, the unregulated loads will appear to be a bigger hunk of the energy used in buildings. So when you hear people say it's a bigger percentage of home use, well, it's because it's a bigger slice of a smaller pie. And for the remaining portions of the code, we're seeing 3 potential more chances to cut from this pie to reach the 2030 target of cutting this regulated load. So moving forward, of course, the first chunk is meeting the zero energy ready home target for the 2023 Oregon Residential Specialty Code. So as you've seen, even without Executive Order 2004, we've been on a pretty progressive slope to meeting what is that target, what that target is of meeting that reduction in the energy use in Oregon homes. The model codes are all sort of, if you see the projected slope for both codes, sort of leveling out as we move forward. We've really done a majority of the low-hanging fruit. It's been picked, and determining what is both technically and economically feasible is going to be harder for this board, and especially when we bring in considerations for affordability of housing. So later in the today's meeting, we'll be reviewing some new rules that are going to be intended to provide more consistency for how information is presented to you for review for the economic and technical feasibility for changes to the energy codes. And again, so we're looking at meeting Executive Order 1720 for the 2023 residential code. In meeting the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home Program, we have done work on this. Go down. We have actually have the projected target. We've worked that out by working directly with the U.S. Department of Energy's program staff. So we've gotten it straight from the horse's mouth of sort of what that target area is. And so in 2021, for the ORSC, we sort of set up that the basis for getting there. We've done our initial comparisons. We've done some modeling, looking at where, how far we need to go. We're going to continue to always look for flexibility in compliance paths for builders. One area we know of is that there was a window measure that actually needs to provided some backward movement or prevented forward movement on the code that we can look at. We're looking at further steps toward moving toward the ducts inside and providing flexibility on that. A note that air sealing on homes is improving thanks to the folks at Energy Trust of Oregon. They've shared data with us. The program homes are now averaging that have been constructed over the past few years are averaging less than 3 air changes per hour, which is a really significant move forward. So looking at these for the 2023 during the adoption cycle, that's coming forward. And with that, I just want to thank you and see if there were any questions from the board. Seeing there, not hearing anything, Chair.
Hey, Mark.
What would you like for me to proceed with the next section?
Hey, Mark, question for you.
Yes, sir.
Was there any analysis of the cost on the affordability of the housing in Oregon?
So, Chair Tamlet, again, Mark Heizer with the division. So relative to the, we look at costs, of course, when we come here, and Is this for the 2023 or future codes? I guess first.
I mean, currently and in the future too. Well,
Okay. So what we'll get into a bit of this for future code as far as looking at, we consistent analysis of what the affordability is of, or the cost effectiveness. We have new methods such that everybody can look at this. There's always discussion of what actual costs are. Well, we'll get into that about the rulemaking in a future, further down in the agenda. As far as affordability of housing, that is an issue statewide, and some things that, of course, we don't have control over, but such as land use issues that just and development charges, fees that but as far as the affordability, we're going to be looking at, and we'll go through some more survey, a slide coming further down about affordability of housing. If I could wait for the next presentation on that one, I think I can get into that in more detail on questions on affordability and how to look at homes. Is that okay, Chair Tamarelli?
okay. Thank you.
So one of the other items will be looking at the home size study and some questions from this board of looking at how to maintain affordability for low and middle income housing. But first, I'd like to give an update on the ventilation work group study. A quick background on this, that during the structural code and mechanical code adoption cycle, it became apparent, especially due to some proposals for additional changes to the code that were presented from outside stakeholders, that the mechanical, structural, and energy codes had some conflicts and lack of clarity regarding ventilation for R2, R3, and R4 occupancies. The language in the codes actually had some conflicts and needed some clarity. They pointed out that there was a need for an in-depth review of ventilation requirements in order to develop a coordinated, really code across the entire spectrum of residential occupancies. Of course, not counting R1 hotels, which were done separately, but the ability to use the natural ventilation path under Chapter 12 of the structural code has always been allowed, and that was not taken away, but it was potential that it could have gone indirectly been removed for our occupancies. But it didn't have clarity whether this was solely for dwelling units or dwelling and sleeping units, such as a dorm room, or whether this also included the public spaces for these occupancies, such as corridors, the rental office, the gym, the laundry rooms, etc. So the reason we're bringing this up is that relative to the residential board, these codes were setting different requirements for low-rise dwellings, which you have purview over for the 3-story and under garden style apartments versus the 3-story and above buildings. And this created additional confusion and potential big cost impact relative to the new 2021 commercial energy code, which set some unclear requirements of when energy recovery units might be required, and of course, which parts of residential occupancies might be impacted. So both the mechanical and structural board directed that the previous requirements for ventilation be maintained, but that the division would convene a work group to develop code solutions that would both recognize the ventilation and safety needs, but also the energy impacts, as well as recognizing past BCD and work on indoor air quality, including moisture control that was done via the Construction Claims Task Force. And finally, yes, relooking at the impact which would on the energy code provisions, which would come back to this board as well. So we're just bringing this to the attention of the residential board. As we convene the work group, we look forward to participation and feedback from interested board members. Continuing forward, so here's where we're looking at affordability and costs and the like. At previous meetings of the board and the energy board, there had been discussion of the cost impact on affordable housing. And this came up when there was a discussion of the Washington State Energy Code that has a home size path. They allow less to be done to homes under 1,500 square feet, fewer energy measures. And then if you go above 5,000 square feet, they require those homes to do more. And there was a lot of interest in looking at whether or not affordability could be looked at for maybe bringing into the Oregon Code something looking at reducing the requirements, looking at affordability of what the federal government is now calling LMI, low and middle income housing. So the subject is really more than just building codes. So the survey, and in your packet, you're going to see this, we put together a survey to reach out to people that normally don't participate in the building code process. And we've had a lot of inquiries when other work groups of, how can people who are interested in low and affordable housing take part in the code process. So we sent out this survey to sort of get some background information. Over 4,000 people received the survey notice. It was not just in our normal email list. We had, again, through participation of other work groups, we tried to make sure we had outreach to people in the affordable housing world. Of the responses that we got back, I'm just going to go through summarizing a few of first, just the data on who provided feedback. There were a lot from the builder, who are single family and multifamily builders. 32% were government. Designers represented 18% of the respondents. There were energy efficiency advocates, researchers, a few low and middle income housing representatives, efficiency program people. And we received, getting a survey today is we were happy to see 215 responses that came back. Some of the pieces we wanted to note is, that when it was asked, should an energy efficiency measure, should the energy savings be able to offset the cost of doing that measure? So really looking at the cost increase of what you're going to pay in your mortgage and insurance. Will that increase, would the energy efficiency savings make up for that? And it was a 60-40 split. Most people did land in wanting to see, that energy improvements should be, you should be able to afford it. It should not increase the net should be to where it's either a savings to you. There was a general consideration that the payback should be met in the life cycle of the energy efficiency measure, because some of these are related to the home and they last a long time. The construction of walls, whereas some are related to equipment that won't last the life of the home. The federal government, we asked some financing questions because the federal government, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, U.S. Department of Energy, we're looking at how they are re-examining how they do their analysis of cost effectiveness. And one piece was just seeing what does it, when you're looking at low and middle income housing, the amount of down payment, the expected interest rates and the like need to be brought in when we're now analyzing cost effectiveness. On part number 5, we just wanted to sort of ask where people expected homes, you know, for a 1,500 square foot home, what would you expect someone to be paying per month for their combined gas and electric for energy use? And pretty much everybody was about on target. It is somewhere between the $60 and $125 per month under the current code, less than $1 a square foot for the annual cost of for a home. And we think this will help inform cost effectiveness in the future. One thing, want to point out, of course, where there was the question of, do we want to look at letting smaller homes have less, you know, be required to build to a lower level of energy code to help with affordability? Of course, we've had 48 years of good success of raising all boats and everyone built to a good code. But in the future, you know, this board may wish to consider something like that. And we asked, well, is it equitable to have smaller homes do less? And the general from a 52 to 35% was, you know, pretty much sort of land in, let's have everyone build to the same code, but that may be considered differently, was sort of the question that came from the board for us to start looking at. One of the other, of some of the remaining questions that came up, we had some sort of, what it would call essay answers, which was really interesting that we did get very good participation when we asked, you know, other informative questions, and we have some samples that are included in your packet, and we divided them up by the different groups. And one thing that we found when doing analysis of this is that regardless of whether it was from government, builders, efficiency advocates, no matter what interest group answered, there was a really diverse spread. Shotgun effect was pretty widely split on answers. So one, for any of the survey questions, it wasn't that any one group leaned one way or another. There was a bit of a surprise for us in our analysis of the responses. One of the last pieces we just want to share with you on this before we get in, move on, is sort of a survey of home sizes that we currently have availability to. Again, thanks to Energy Trust of Oregon. They share their data on the program homes. And we looked at their data from April 2015 to January of 2021 of what's been through their program and home sizes. And out of 17,000 units that they have data for, one of the interesting points is that of these program homes, these are homes that are being built under the Energy Trust program, most of them are above code, is that about 9% are in the under 50, or in that small category, under 1,500 square feet. So that's a, you know, interesting portion. But what we did was really looking at, you know, what's outside in smaller areas, you know, places that are outside, you know, really high expense, urban growth boundary limited areas. And when you move outside of the, you know, more dense area, population areas, that number under 1,500 square feet actually increases to 15% of construction. So when you get into more rural areas, even among the program homes, higher concentration of small homes, that this could have an impact on. Of course, we have to remember that if you do set a lower compliance level for small homes, that does affect the overall efficiency rating of the overall code. We also looked at large homes. Of course, Washington State requires more for 5,000 square foot homes. We wanted to see how many 4,000 square foot and larger homes are in being constructed, at least among these above code homes. And even within the entirety of the ETO program, they represent less than 2% of these above code homes. And we kind of expected a larger number. And when you move to rural and remote areas, less dense areas, that drops to less than 1% of total homes. So the Washington home size additional measure methods might not return the desired impact, because if you set something for the bigger homes, we really aren't looking at a substantive number of homes to make up for allowances for smaller. So if the board's interested in continuing to review home size and energy costs and the impacts of what to potentially look at for smaller, we just wanted to let you know that we have potential access to data to get, and it's very hard to find, but we've found an ability to get home construction data for new homes. We would look at what's been done over, say, the past 2 years of new homes and see how the real distribution of home sizes are through the state, and see whether you're interested in looking at developing something relative in the energy provisions relative to home size. Thank you.
Any question for Mark? Okay, now let's move on to the next items. Communication, we have none. Unfinished business, we have none. We move to the new business. We have, I think, 3 items that require motion, and I will invite Mr. Bolton to present it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry, can I jump in? I guess this is Eli Volem. I'm sorry, I guess I wasn't clear if those were the reports, and we're looking for, because it looks like Building Codes Division was looking for feedback on the mechanical ventilation and the home size. So was that the appropriate time to share feedback on those, or are we going to go over those reports a little more in depth?
That's the appropriate time. So we can do that now if you'd like.
Okay. So yeah, sorry for, because I just had a couple of thoughts. So let's see here. So the ventilation, the action requested was discussing providing feedback on the division's plans to convene a work group. So I'm fully supportive of it on the ventilation. I think that makes a ton of sense. Let's see, I guess a couple thoughts I jotted down were the current Oregon Structural Specialty Code currently says that natural ventilation is not allowed when a blower door test is conducted and the result is less than 5 air changes. So I guess I would throw out there, what is the average blower door test? I mean, we know what it is for single family homes, but what is it for multifamily? And if the average blower door test is below 5, I mean, just because we're not testing doesn't mean we shouldn't require mechanical ventilation. So I guess I would urge that group to ask some questions and try to solicit some data on what is the average tightness on dwelling units. And that might provide one answer. As always, I think costs and benefits, just looking at real data, like what are the real costs, not just costs that support an agenda one way or the other. And is ventilation doing its intended purpose, whether it's natural or mechanical? So testing, data, validation, I think all that stuff's going to be really important. And as far as folks that should sit on that group, I'd say look for somebody with building science experience, look for an engineer that, can do energy efficiency calculations and can understand and measure airflows, and maybe indoor air quality specialists would be good. Obviously, builders and equipment vendors would also be folks you want to have on that work group as well to help inform what's out there and what are real costs. As to the home sizing, I guess I'd throw it out there. We're trying to accomplish the Department of Energy Zero Energy Ready Performance. That program does have a size adjustment factor. It's based on the size of the house and the number of bedrooms. So I think that is probably an appropriate way to look at it. If we do look to do some sort of size adjustment factor, and we say, we want to require additional measures for homes over 5,000 square feet. What if that 5,000 square foot home has 12 bedrooms? I mean, it might be very efficient living space per occupant. So we should probably look at number of bedrooms relative to the size of the house. There is a methodology right there in the zero energy program that we could look at. It'd be interesting to look at how Washington arrived at their, looking at less than 1,500 square feet. There might be some justification to just kind of work off of what they've done. And in general, I'm supportive of rewarding small homes. I mean, I think ultimately we're trying to accomplish saving energy, and those smaller homes are just going to use less energy. And I mean, I throw in the caveat, we should also, keep the number of bedrooms in mind. But if we're really trying to save energy, then rewarding the homes that use less energy, if they're doing it with size, I think it's a good thing. Penalizing larger homes, I don't know. I'm a little bit on the fence. I'm not hugely concerned about costs on those larger homes, saying, oh, we can't do it because it's too expensive. Well, if you're building a 5,000 or 6,000, 7,000 square foot home, I question if it's really that hard to, invest in a little bit more energy efficiency. And it just kind of comes back to the point too, there's a lot of above code programs out there like LEED's one, and you could have a LEED Platinum home in Alaska, and you could have a LEED Platinum home in Florida, and you could say they're equivalent performance. One of those homes could be 600 square feet, and the other home could be 6,000 square feet. And you're saying they're the same performance, and yeah, it's performance relative to if it was built to something else. But if the ultimate thing is saving energy, it's very obvious that those two different homes in different climates, different sizes are going to be using very different amounts of energy. So I think it makes sense to continue exploring size. Let's look at how a size adjustment in the target we're trying to achieve with the zero energy ready home factors into what we're doing. And same thing, I think, having a diverse group of folks to weigh in on that is going to be important. And as always, I'm going to encourage folks to get real cost data and real performance data. And I think it's a good avenue to pursue. So thanks for letting me share my thoughts.
Go ahead, Andy.
Okay, if there's nothing else on that, go ahead and move on.
Can I interrupt this? This is Gordon Anslow. Can I just interject a couple of quick comments regarding the home size business? I'm sorry I didn't jump in earlier.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I spent a lot of time thinking on this subject, and it was very useful looking at all the material that was sent along in the survey and whatnot. And I really will try to be brief here and not do my usual foaming at the mouth thing on this, but in that I am like on a daily basis talking with real people about putting together houses for people. A pretty good finger on the pulse of what we hear from what real people who are trying to get themselves into housing experience. And I have to say that I spend a fair amount of time telling nice, fresh-faced young couples that we can't even remotely come close to building a house they can afford. The whole affordability thing, without going too far down the road, has a lot of parts, some of which are not our business to really worry about, although obviously land cost is a thing and the expense of permits and STCs, to say nothing of, all the other stuff's going on in the supply chain world. But just because there are other parts that we can't really do anything about, I think it's still important that we who have control, a little bit of control over a portion of the whole equation, don't say, well, we shouldn't really worry about this because we can't help all these other areas. I hope the other areas can get help. Ultimately, I'm interested in seeing as many people as possible be able to get into houses that they can afford. And as I've said before, when people come to us and they say they have a budget of like $350,000, and we tell them we can't even get close to that, they go out and they buy an old house built in 1951, and which may or may not have been well weatherized. So I mean, the kind of demand tends to get met one way or another. Although in some small percentage of people can't do anything and they end up out in the streets. But with regard to the approach to the home sizing thing, which I know that I had kind of raved about this some months ago, and I take some comfort and pleasure in seeing that we're now talking about the home sizing thing. You could, I suppose, go down a road where you basically say that everybody gets a budget of so many BTUs that you get to use, to house yourself, whether it's spent on space heating, water heating, whatever. Obviously, the size of the house is a big deal, and I would urge that we look at it. I did look, I'm familiar with the Washington method. There are like 5 different ways that you can set but you can approach probably more than that, but I think the worst way to do this is say that all houses, let's just say, all houses below 1,800 feet have this standard, and then everything, and then there's a great big step up, and everything after that, or just pick a number, is at this higher standard. Whenever you're trying to regulate something that's variable, if you just have a single step in it, well, everybody or a lot of people just run up to the short of that step up, and then they do stuff. The other thing is you can stair step it, and as a house goes, let's say from 1,000 feet to say 5,000 feet, that there are incremental steps, which like when your house gets over a certain size, that now you have to implement these other measures. The other thing is to have kind of just a straight line thing that's proportional, that as a house gets bigger, the energy restrictions get more restrictive. I think you balance between wanting to not make things needlessly complicated and hard to understand, but also you don't want it on the other end to be clunky. And I think the clunkiest thing is where you say houses below this many square feet have to do this, houses above this many square feet have to do that. There's a couple of other models, but rather than go into them now, I may just kind of graphically draw these up and circulate them, to talk about. But if we do go down the road, and I hope that we do go down the road of seriously looking at implementing house sizing, and I agree that there should be recognition of the fact that people, let's say family units that need more bedrooms, should not be penalized for the fact that they need more bedrooms. I'm reminded of in the 1970s, the FHA used to have a manual for designing houses that were financed under FHA. And I think I still have an ancient dog-eared copy of that somewhere, but they had a very interesting thing about about designing they had minimum standards, including, the dreaded minimum bedroom size. Talk about houses with different numbers of bedrooms. And it always made me kind of think about, there are people that have 6 children and just because they're trying to have enough rooms to accommodate their family, that they shouldn't be kind of penalized for that. So I think that including something about the bedroom count is a good idea. I mostly these days work with older couples who are empty nesters. I tend to just think of, 2 of them. But I think it's important to kind of think about who these rules are getting applied to. And I'm very much in favor of making some recognition of the fact that larger family units, which are often not just mom and dad and 8 kids, but also multi-generational families with, aging parents, or down on their luck, family members living in them. So I think I hope that will end up being in the mix. Anyway, that is the majority of what I have to say. I may write a little more on this and also do a graphic depiction of the way that you could implement these restrictions that are house size based over a range of house sizes rather than just doing, you know, a really simplistic kind of everything less than this much gets this standard and everything larger than this gets that standard. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Bolton, Senior Policy Advisor with the division. The Oregon Low-Rise Residential Dwelling Code was created in 2003 and was put under the authority of the Residential Manufactured Structures Board. The scope of the Low-Rise Code includes provisions that fall in specialty codes other than the Oregon Residential Specialty Code to avoid duplication and harmonize the Oregon certification and licensing categories. The division prints those those provisions in their respective specialty codes and then brings those provisions to this board for approval of the inclusion of those provisions in the low-rise code. You can find a full breakdown of where the various low-rise provisions are printed in a memo in the board packet. This agenda item is to approve the low-rise provisions that were included in the 2022 Oregon Structural Specialty Code. You can find a full breakdown of the OSSC low-rise provisions in the board packet. And Tony Rocco is here to field any technical questions that you may have. This item will require a motion, and a motion to approve should include a finding that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources.
Thanks, Andy. Mr. Chairman, at your pleasure, I'd like to run through a couple of the matrix items for the board. Again, for the record, Tony Rocco with the division. So as Andy noted, this is something that we do, every time an OSSC is being adopted. We come back to this board that maintains purview over those low-rise apartment provisions. Just to give you a background, the OSSC Code Review Committee did some great work. They met 6 times, and all of these provisions that are before you were approved by the Building Code Structures Board earlier this year. And the matrix there kind of highlights the items involving those low-rise apartments, or could involve those low-rise apartments. And I just wanted to point out a few of those items to the board as we kind of work through. So in Chapter 9, one of the big items is an existing Oregon amendment, longstanding Oregon amendment regarding substantial damage and substantial alteration. Great Oregon amendment that we have, and really no technical changes on that amendment, but it is being moved to Chapter 34. And one of the notes on Chapter 34, which we're pretty excited about, is that we're going to have an integrated Chapter 34 with Oregon amendments and the model international existing building code provisions together, so that the cross-referencing will no longer be required between that model code, the IEBC, and those amendments that are placed in the OSSC. So a good one there. Moving along, in Chapter 11, the ANSI A117.1 design standard for accessibility has been updated to the 2017 iteration. There were a couple of public proposal amendments made to Chapter 11 that would impact, apartment units, the Type A and Type B units. But otherwise, there's going to be very negligible impact of the design standard change regarding those accessible units for apartments. In Chapter 16, there are various structural design clarifications that have been made. A lot of good stuff there. The ASCE 7 standard iteration is staying the same. Looking at that one being possibly updated on the next OSSC adoption following this. And in Chapter 17, there is a new fire stop special inspection requirement for larger Group R occupancies, and you'll see that added there in your matrix. And then in Chapter 31, a couple of items to point out. The existing solar photovoltaic provisions have been updated and clarified. our technical team had a great effort in clarifying those for the committee, and the committee added some great information to those clarifications as well. And then there's also a new subsection regarding the solar ready construction requirements that were required by Executive Order 17-20. So that's a new thing there in Chapter 31. And with that, Mr. Chair, I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have. Thank you.
Any question for Tony or Amy? Okay, we need a motion. We need a motion from the members.
It's through the chair. Rabi, I've moved to approve.
Second.
Through the chair, this is John Camiller. I second.
Okay, let's take the vote.
Really quickly, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry. I'm just going to break in here. Andy Bolton, Policy Advisor for the Division. I just want to make sure that I understand that that motion is being made with the finding that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources.
I'll amend it to add what Andy added.
Thank you.
I second.
Thank you. Go ahead, Melissa.
Gordon Anslow,
Yes, I vote for it.
Forrest Barnes,
Yay.
John Camiller,
Yes.
Rich Fry,
Yes.
Emily Kemper,
Yes.
Eli Volem,
Yes.
Chair Rebbe Timmerhallet.
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank you. The next one, Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Bolton, Senior Policy Advisor with Division. Again, this agenda item has to do with the low-rise code provisions, and the same background applies here. This agenda item is to approve the low-rise provisions that were included in the 2022 Oregon Mechanical Specialty Code. You can find a full breakdown of the OMSC low-rise provisions in a matrix packet. And Mark Heizer is here to field any technical questions you may have. This item will require a motion, and a motion to approve should include a finding. The added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public, or necessary to conserve scarce resources.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Once again, Mark Heizer with the division to go over the provisions of the 2022 Mechanical Specialty Code that might affect, again, low-rise housing. Repeating the work or the notes earlier from Mr. Rocco, the mechanical board, its code committee was very good this time around. It made some very good improvements to the language to help for enforcement. The pieces from the matrix for the changes found in the 2022 Oregon Mechanical Specialty Code that may be of interest to you are primarily about the first item on condensate disposal. Some good change was made to the language that are currently Oregon amendments to add that or other approved locations for disposal of condensate. The current language was just a little too restrictive for some locations. So sometimes this will now allow a little more flexibility for future designs. As earlier noted, the dwelling unit ventilation requirements are staying as is pending results from the work group. One item from a public proposal was for some new language for there are limitations in the current code about the distance between an air exhaust outlet and a mechanical intake. One proposal and that modifies new code language allows the use of concentric openings that have both an exhaust outlet and an air intake. These are used for a lot of these little dwelling unit ventilation systems. These are being allowed as long as it's a factory built intake and exhaust unit. The model code language allowed it if approved by local jurisdiction. The additional Oregon amendment from a public proposal 22-02 said pretty much it is part of the code. You don't need special approval for that as long as it's a listed factory air intake and exhaust unit. The biggest new item, the only one that really has any real cost impact, had to do with the fuel gas code about condensate drain piping from condensing furnaces and other equipment. There is normally a primary condensate drain, and some methods for safety are that if that primary drain gets blocked, there's a secondary drain. The model code added language that if you have these drain lines, say, disappear into a wall or out of sight, that when they come back out of the wall, you're able to distinguish between the primary drain and the secondary backup drain, because you really want to know that if you're seeing water coming out of the backup drain, you obviously have a problem that does need to be addressed. There's requirement in model code that the secondary drain be clearly marked, and the code committee wanted to make sure that it was more than just taking a marker on a piece of pipe and you wouldn't see it again, that it is a embossed or engraved tag that would be on that secondary overflow. Probably a $1 or $2 impact on the cost of that installation. So that is the one item that does have a cost increase. That is it for the mechanical code changes for 2022. And I will turn it back to the chair, and I'm available for questions if anyone has some.
Thank you, Mark. Any discussion or question for Mark or Andy? Okay, if you're none, we need a motion for this item.
Sure. This is Eli Volem. Following the recommendation of the mechanical board, I move to approve the low-rise apartment construction standards as proposed for the 2022 OMSC and forward to the administrator for rulemaking and subsequent adoption with the finding that the added cost, if any, is necessary to the health and safety of the occupants or the public or necessary to conserve scarce resources.
Thank you, Arnie. Second.
This is Emily. I second.
Thank you. Melissa, take the vote, please.
Gordon Anslow.
I vote in favor.
Forrest Barnes.
Yay.
John Camiller.
Yes.
Rich Fry.
Yes.
Emily Kemper.
Yes.
Eli Volem.
Yes.
Chair Rabbi Timmerhallet.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next, Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Bolton, Senior Policy Advisor with the division. As a part of the process of adopting the Oregon Residential Specialty Code, the division and the Residential Manufacturer Structured Board develop and approve provisions relating to energy efficiency. The division is proposing new rules that would define the process that is followed to adopt these energy efficiency provisions. This process would create additional structure within the energy provision proposal and adoption process. It would make the process more consistent and verifiable, and would enable the division and stakeholders in the adoption process to compare the energy savings and cost impacts of different code proposals and with the division's proposed changes, if any. The new process would build in time for public review and input on the proposed energy provisions of the ORSC and create a more predictable code adoption process for the energy provisions. There's a copy of the proposed rule in the board packet, and Mark Heizer is here if there are any questions about how this process will impact code development and the adoption process relative to energy efficiency provisions of the ORSC. And this item will require a motion.
Thank you. Mark, do you have anything to add?
Thank you, Chair Tamara. For the division, Mark Heizer, nothing else to add here for questions. If needed, the rules are really, as discussed earlier, to help set a consistent process for analyzing code changes, whether proposed by the division or the public, so that everybody can starts at the same point and uses a similar methodology so that you can be able to analyze what the real cost impacts were. When people do energy modeling, they may be using different software. It can give some slightly different results, but this to be able to show that if you're going to repeat it with different software, that you can repeat the work and also have a chance to really look at the proposed cost impact so that everyone can, so the board can properly analyze it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any discussion or question to Mark or Andy?
This is Eli Volem. Through the chair, I guess I have a couple comments. So I think I very much support the intent of this. I think consistent and verifiable is good. Public review and input are good. Predictable code adoption process is good. So I guess I'm curious just about clarification on the public process. So looking at the timeline there, it looks like it's a invitation to the public to submit written proposals, and then the other opportunities are through the public rulemaking. Are those the only opportunities, or is there anticipation that the code review committee would also be interacting with the public in any shape or form other than being composed of public members?
Andy, you can take it if you want, or I was going to jump in. But yeah, this is Alana Cox of the division. We do intend that the code committee process will be completely public and take public input at that process, and then also at the board process. So you'll see on that timeline, they can make proposals, then that code committee process will be a public process. Then the board has an opportunity to review and make its recommendation. That's another opportunity for a public meeting and public input. And then it goes into rulemaking. And really, it's important that there's public input opportunities throughout the process, because the kinds of choices we get to make get narrowed down as you get further in the process. And really, it's after board approval, we can only take impact basically on pulling things out and reverting back to current code. So that public involvement in the code committee process and board process is really important. Does that answer your question, Eli?
It does, thank you. And I have a follow-up question too, I guess, and this is through the chair and to my fellow board members as well. To me, it's very important. I think it is to everybody that we look at real costs and real data, real energy performance. And I don't see any red flags in this language, but I'm curious if anyone has any concerns about the description of how cost information is going to be gathered.
Through the chair, this is Emily. I think that's a good question, Eli. I think the intention of this is great, and I also value the opportunity to have consistent and predictable processes for this. I think using the US EIA for information and data is also a valuable source. Having gotten data from the EIA before, I'm not sure that you're going to get to the level of granularity that you need. So I think, I'm not sure, Eli, if that's what you were referring to. I think that's where my concern would lie.
Yeah, this is Eli Volem again. I guess, yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at is, we approve this today, and then the board's looking at measures in the future, and costs are always a top point of consideration. And so this is the opportunity, I think, to weigh in on our identifying the appropriate way to collect costs or just to recognize that we're going to be looking at costs collected, through this methodology, and that's what the basis of decision making will be made on in the future.
Yeah, and again, this is Emily through the chair. Everything that you just said, Eli, and I think maybe if we could acknowledge that we have to start somewhere in collecting costs, but then also agree to sort of pursue continuous improvement and pursue better data sets in the future, I think that would be great.
Mark.
Through the chair, Mark Heizer with the division. Just want to point out that the US EIA information is really about coming up with the cost of fuel. So when you do a cost analysis, you need to know, you have to have a set point of, here's what the cost of electricity is this year when you do the analysis. Here's what the cost of natural gas is. The remaining costs that come up in parts B, C, D, et cetera, are directly from the proponents, and like past decisions made by the boards, we rely both on the code committees, and you rely on the code committees to review the numbers and add their expertise. And when it gets to this board, you rely, your expertise in looking at, well, is that a reasonable number? And this is setting up additional notes for that when someone gives a cost, they have a breakdown of how they achieved those costs, say for materials, labor, is it a subcontractor, overhead and profit, potentially getting people in the same, comparing apples to apples when it comes to the cost of construction. Did that help some? Thank you.
Through the chair, Mark, I think yes and no. I think it's absolutely appropriate to rely on our expertise across the board, but then to a certain extent, you could also say that expertise is anecdotal, right? So I personally would like to see us strive for more consistent data sets for all of those things. I mean, I think the cost survey that's been provided in our packet is remarkable. It's, having gone through it, it's providing us with some really interesting data, some really interesting feedback from a diverse group of people, to the extent that we can continue to pursue those sorts of avenues, but then also hard data from whatever source that we can within the state. I would like to see that as well.
Any more comments? Okay, we need the motion.
This is Eli Volem. I was just looking for the language. I will move to approve the division's proposed code adoption process.
I think that's the wrong one.
I'm looking at
We're on C, aren't we?
C. Sorry.
Yes, we're on C.
Yeah. Sorry. There we go. I was on the last page. Jumped ahead. I move to approve the division's draft rules defining the process for adopting the energy provisions of the ORSC and forward to the administrator for rulemaking and subsequent adoption.
And this is Emily. I second.
Thank you. Any more discussion? None. Okay. Melissa, call the vote, please.
Gordon Anslow,
I approve.
Forrest Barnes,
Yay.
John Camiller,
Yes.
Rich Fry,
Yes.
Emily Kemper,
Yes.
Eli Volem,
Yes.
Chair Rebbe Timmerhulet.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Last item, Andy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Andy Bolton, Senior Policy Advisor with the division. The division is requesting the board's approval to move forward with the code adoption process for the 2023 Oregon Residential Specialty Code. There's a memo outlining the division's recommended process steps, as well as an outline of the proposed timeline in the board packet. Here today, the division is requesting board action on a few items. Approve the division's recommended use of the 2021 International Residential Code for use as the baseline code for the 2023 ORSC. Approve the division's recommendation to solicit and appoint a code committee with a solicitation for members opening on June 1st, 2022 and held open until June 17th, 2022. And approve the division's recommendation to open a public proposal period to review proposals for inclusion in the 2023 ORSC. This proposal period would open on July 1st and be held open until August 19th, 2022. The code committee meetings will be determined based on availability of code committee members, but the meetings will occur after the end of the public proposal period on August 19th, 2022. Tony Rocco from the division is here as well if there are any technical questions relating to the kickoff of the code process. And this item will require a motion.
Any discussion or comments? Okay, we need a motion from members.
This is Eli Volem, but I guess I'd have a question under the first bullet point of action requested. It says looking for board determination of the appropriate model code to use as a baseline, but I don't see any discussion about recommendation in the background or the rest of this memo. So can somebody talk to that point?
Yes, through the chair. Thanks for the question, Eli. So our current ORSC is based on the 2018 iteration of the IRC, and the only available model code beyond that is the 2021 iteration of the IRC. And so that would be kind of the assumed default for looking for improvements, ways to improve on our current 2021 ORSC. Hopefully that answers your question. So you'd have the options. You have options of, maintaining current code as the baseline, looking at those model changes that are available now in that latest iteration of the model. And that would be the 21 iteration, as Andy noted. Hope that helps.
Yes, to the chair. Thanks, Tony. This is Eli Volem. That does help. That's, I guess, I was reading between the lines, and I was suspecting that was the case. And I guess curious to hear if anyone else on the board has thoughts. I personally think it makes sense to look at the 2021 and see what's in there, and not, close off any possibilities of using that. But I don't think is the Building Code Division looking for recommendations on from the board on which version, the 2018 or 2021, to go off of, or just that we could look at either?
Again, through the chair, Eli, my understanding is that it's always at the pleasure of the board to make a recommendation. Again, the only model code to pull new changes that would improve our current code would be the 21 iteration, since our current code is based on the 18 already. And I believe we already even pulled in some good provisions from the 21 iteration during the adoption process. Hopefully that helps.
Yes, this is Eli Volem. That does help. So that basically I think we're teeing it up, saying we're going to be looking at the 2021, and just we want everyone to recognize that that's the opportunity for us to find the savings that are going to be necessary to achieve the executive order. So I guess I'm just putting that out as a comment to the board, just to make sure everyone's understanding that it looks like we're looking at that 2021 baseline for this next version.
Mm-hmm. Any comment or discussion? We need a motion from the members.
Well, to keep things moving forward again, this is Eli Volem. I move to approve the division's proposed code adoption process steps.
Second.
This is John Camiller. I second.
Any more discussion or comments? None. Melissa, call the vote, please.
Gordon Anslow,
I approve.
Forrest Barnes,
Yay.
John Camiller,
Yes.
Rich Fry,
Yes.
Emily Kemper,
Yes.
Eli Volem,
Yes.
Vice Chair Rebby Tamerhalet.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 7, announcement. We have none. And item 8 is adjournment. There have been no further business. I adjourn the Residential and Manufactured Structural Board meeting at 11:03. Thank you. And I hope to see you next time face to face.